Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. I'm your host, the Game Master, and in this one, we're going to be talking about La Blue Girl, which will be sort of notorious with a portion of our listeners. And I have a feeling, based on previous comments and stuff, that a lot of our listeners will have no idea what La Blue Girl is. Um, my explanations in this video are going to be as family friendly as they can be for what was the in my opinion the biggest hentai franchise of the 1990s. It hit, as it just so happens, at the exact same time that I was old enough to buy such things. Um and how do I want to put this? So, like, if you're someone who plays role playing games and you only play a campaign for maybe 3 months or 6 months, or even if you only play for a couple years, I guess, um, you might look back on that campaign with fond memories, but you might not really pick it apart and think about all of its pieces or how it related to wherever you were in life at the time, the way we do with our game, right? Because for us, for better or worse, when you listen to this podcast, you're not just getting the stories about a fictional world, right? You're getting insight into a group of friends as they grew up. Some of the adventures in the 80s was when we were little kids, and a lot of those adventures were like a guy robs a bank, we beat him up, the end, right? Uh and some of the adventures now, that takes place in the modern day, you're going to get a whole different kind of style of story there, right? Because now we're middle-aged guys playing a game together or whatever. This is when we were 18, right? And so when hentai hit, most of us had never seen it before. Like, a couple of the guys had seen an old movie called Heavy Metal that some of you will be familiar with. Um, so they'd had a little taste of the idea of a cartoon being adult, right? For most of us, though, we'd never seen anything like it before, and it just blew our minds. And if I'm being really honest with you, we kind of went hog wild. We overdid it. And like almost all of those at the time would be VCR tapes, right? Almost all of those old VHS hentai things, um, we were incorporating into the game. And I personally, I felt like everywhere I went, suddenly I was seeing it. Before I was 18, I never saw it anywhere. And then, like, almost as soon as I turned 18, just so happens to be when it hit big, at least in the area where I lived. So you could go to the record store at the mall and you could get it. You could, go to Blockbuster Video and rent one. You could go to, I don't know, the local comic book store. They were all selling them suddenly, and they were big sellers. They were selling like hotcakes, of course, and everybody kind of, wanted in on that. So, so they were everywhere, and as always, your mileage may vary. It's very hard for me to think of pretty much anything that's unanimous ever, right? But the way it seemed to me was that the La Blue Girl franchise was sort of the king of this genre, at least back then, before the internet. Um, so in this video, I'm going to first talk a little bit about, and I'm gonna leave out the gory details, by the way, because I know this is not everybody's cup of tea. But if you're kind of wanting to know a little about what was the deal, I'm gonna talk about that. I'm gonna set things up about the actual story in the videos, and then I'm going to talk about what we did in our game. And the irony is we kind of didn't do what you'd expect us to do. Like, in the game, I don't think we ever had a single love scene at all. with these characters, right? Which is exactly the opposite of the point of what they're doing when you watch the anime. Um, we tended to hone in on some of the more obscure characters and background characters and stuff like that. We would think something about that was interesting, and then we would kind of take that ball and run with it. So at any rate, as for the series itself, the whole thing starts in feudal Japan. And they say that there was this thing called the Age of Strife, and that all these different ninja clans were kind of popping up everywhere. And they were all at war with each other. It was almost like gangs, right? And they were all kind of wanting to be the best. They wanted to somehow dominate all the others, and so on and so forth. So it starts to get into this idea of Japanese mythology. And there's this race that they call the Shikima. And the way, like for me, when I watched it, that was dubbed, so you had English voice actors and stuff like that. And which, by the way, as a brief aside, I was always wondering what that must be like in the studio. to, some poor girl comes in and has to say these lines, it's pretty wild to think about. At any rate, I digress. But at any rate, so the gist is that, going back to the feudal Japan thing, so the supernatural exists. And there's this race called the Shikima, and in the dub, they refer to them as demons. And I feel like that's not a fantastic translation, actually. And I don't think we have anything like that, in our culture. Um, so they're not demons in the sense of like you know, hell and the devil and fire and stuff like that. It's really, I feel like the better word they should have used was just monsters. And there's this other realm or dimension or whatever you want to call it. And it's just full of these monsters. And for the most part, they're bad. They're not, like there's a couple of good ones actually, but they're pretty few and far between, right? And how do I want to explain these guys? First of all, like just physically, kind of, they can just they can be whatever they want to be. They I don't mean they're shapeshifters, but I mean like there's no consistency in the race. It's like you could have one that's blue and that one's kid is red, and it's all just completely random. Some have tentacles, some have horns, some have a lion's mane. They're just all over the place, right? One might look like Doomsday from DC Comics, while the next one looks like She-Hulk. It's just, you know, you get it. So point being, these various ninja clans become aware of this other realm, right? And start interacting with it. And the most kind of hell-like or whatever Judeo-Christian kind of thing that I would assign to them is, in terms of their behavior, I would liken them to an incubus. And I don't ever remember seeing a female, by the way. I'd call them a succubus if there were any females. But it's been forever since I've seen the series. It's not fresh in my mind. Feel free to correct me in the comments if someone knows better. But I think they're all male, but they act like an incubus, right? And so they're I think that the idea they're going for is that the male ninjas in this one clan, because they're interacting with this other realm, they're kind of picking up bad habits, right? And so these guys start to do stuff to an all-female clan, and the females hate it. I'll leave it at that, right? Because that'd be in poor taste to get into. I don't like that part of the series. But the females then, um, they have this, I forget if they called it a talisman or what they called it, but they have this little like, oh, signet case. I guess that's what they call it, is a signet case. But whoever has possession of this thing can control the schema, right? So they weaponize them. And and so it's kind of like if these male ninjas who are a-holes, let's call a spade a spade. If these guys are committing a certain kind of crime against the girls send the incubi to do the exact same thing to the guys, right? Give them a taste of their own medicine. So this goes on for ages. And the leaders of this female ninja clan, the family name is Mido, Mido. So all the Mido women possess the signet case and so on and so forth. And so the Mido ninja clan, by the time you get to the modern day, which the manga version of this came out in the real late 80s, ran through, I want to say 92. And then the anime was for sale shortly after that in like mid 90s and had a couple sequels and stuff later. But at any rate, so when the story begins in what was at the time modern day Japan, the Mito family has this signet case in their possession, and it's a grandma, and she has it. And so these I hate to call them demons, but I'll just call them demons. The schema, right? Over the years, they have taught magic to both sides, right? Because during the struggle, when at one point earlier, one side would have the signet case, then the other side would da 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 da. It's kind of like that idea of watcher angels teaching people witchcraft, way back when. Very similar idea. So these ninjas now have these superhuman things that they can do. Like for instance, they could pluck a hair out and use it for like acupuncture, and they know pressure points and stuff, where they can basically get whatever reaction from you they want to get by sticking their hair in one of your pressure points. It's like all real weird out there kind of stuff. Um, but so at the beginning of the story, because the grandma's getting up in years, she can't really protect it anymore. For some reason, her daughter isn't around, and at first we don't know why. But the daughter's daughter is, and that's Miko. And so she's the main character in the series, Miko Mito. And I'm using a picture of her here, so you know what she looks like: purple hair, pink bow, kind of, all that. Um, and Miko is, for some reason, sort of like more talented at everything. She's kind of a chosen one type. She's superhumanly good at this stuff that they do, right? And whether it's like a physical thing, like traditional ninjutsu, whether it is um more on the magic end of stuff that they do, she's just better at everything. So so at any rate, her mom is not around. Her mom really kind of should have had the signet case by now, but doesn't. So in the grandma's weakened state, she can't hang on to it, and the bad guys get their hands on it. The bad guys attack, they kill the grandma. Now they have the signet case. They control this evil monster realm, and they start sending monsters after Miko. And obviously, this is an adult series, so therefore the encounters, that's really at the end of the day the point of the series. Um, and in nudity and stuff like that. But Miko always wins. As I recall, she every time wins, and in the end, she kills the guy. Um, so there's kind of like an element of karma to it, I think. Um, she ends up going into the Shima realm, and throughout her adventure, it's kind of a hero's journey kind of a thing. It turns out that the king of the Shima, who is, I hate to call him good, he's not as bad as the others. I'll put it that way, right? Like he has good qualities. She finds out that that's where her mother has been, as her mother fell in love with the Shima King, and her mom is like the hottest character ever, right? She would literally get my vote for number one hottest anime girl of all time. Her name was Maria. At any rate, so she's like the queen. And so part of what's going on there is Maria is sort of like, if you know who Grimer Wormtongue is from Lord of the Rings, and he like whispers in the king's ear and he gets the king to do bad things. Maria's like the polar opposite, where she's kind of almost like trying to reform and stuff. And she is having a positive influence on the king, which is why he's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but he's better, right, than he would be otherwise. And then that kind of played into our role-playing game later, because it means the schema are not 100% bad. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay. But most of them certainly are, and the ones that go to Earth to attack people, I'm obviously saying they are. I don't want anybody to get the wrong idea. This can be a complicated thing to talk about. Okay, so, um, she has a bunch of adventures. She actually, at one point, meets a girl who's a werewolf, who she lacks the skills that the ninjas have, but she has certain powers because of her physicality and stuff like that. She, what was her name? Oh, I forgot her name. It's like Yuki, something like that. Um, and then she meets another girl named Fubuki Kai, and Fubuki Kai is a blonde girl, and her thing is she has like all the skills, but none of the more like biological powers, right? So we find out that Miko is the daughter of Maria and the Shima King. So Miko is like half demon, and therefore she has all the skills and all the powers, right? Which is why initially she kind of comes off as like a Mary Sue, but we explain it. And so that's why she wins over her opponents, but she doesn't win by like a mile, because a bunch of these monster things are pretty tough. And that's pretty much it. That's really what the series is about, right? Um Something I thought was really interesting, and is I can't remember, again, I haven't seen it for ages, but I want to say it's like episode 2, maybe, is you find out that there used to be this chick named Kamarie. And this is one of these obscure characters I was talking about earlier, where we would pick up the ball and run with it. I thought Kamarie was super interesting. Kamarie is human. She's not half demon or anything like that. She's got green hair, but she is like, you know how Jordan was supposed to be like the greatest Green Lantern of all time? Kamarie is supposed to be the greatest ninja of all time. And she's a member of this female ninja clan. And so she has mastered the traditional ninja stuff to the point where, honestly, the way they kind of present her, in my understanding of it anyways, is she would actually be the greatest ninja warrior in all of fiction. And I don't say that lightly. I think that Kamarie could like beat up Snake Eyes or the Shredder or whoever, right? And again, I don't say that lightly. I love those other characters. But Kamarie was so good. She had like no rival, right? Nobody could touch her. And so that sort of plants the seeds of her going down the wrong path, right? And then the other thing is, on top of just the traditional physical skills, she's also a master of all this magic stuff that these monsters have taught her, and so on and so forth. And so she gets her hands on an evil sword, and there's a whole big thing with it. She betrays her clan. Um, and then in the anime they kill her. And in our game, I thought she was super interesting, and I loved this idea that she was like this ultimate ninja, and so we took it a totally different route. Of course, we have the John Redbridge character, and Kamarie turning bad is supposed to have happened well before Miko turned 18 in the 90s and had all these adventures and so on and so forth. So we said, well, John Redbridge travels the world all the time and he's immortal. And so we actually had him meet Kamarie before all of this happened. And so our version of her never turns bad, never betrays the clan, so on and so forth. She's just hanging out with the good guys. And then the one guy that used to play with us, his name was Travis Manier. He made a character, instead of Kamarie, I think it was Kamaro, but he was her son. So he was this guy with um short green hair and stuff like that. And so his mom taught him everything that she knew. And so he was like a major character in our game years after the fact then, that he was like arguably the greatest ninja of all time. But that was his deal. And so that's one of those moments in the game where you had to kind of know who she is to appreciate who he is, right? And then there was this other character, and he's hard to describe. His name is Nin-Nin, and he's a comedy character. And I almost want to compare him to like Orko from He-Man in a way, where Nin-Nin, he had this way of talking. I feel like I would blow out the microphone if I tried to do an impression of him, but it's kind of like gee, Mika, you're so pretty. Like that was like his whole deal. And Nin-Nin's job in the series is to kind of like react to whatever's going on. And the comedy effect is, the girls are going to be planning an attack on whatever, a village or something like that. And Nin-Nin is kind of going over and sniffing their perfume and being kind of a little perv, basically. And so like me and all my friends had watched this, and there was a point where we weren't playing the game, by the way. We were like at Taco Bell or something, uh on a Friday night or whatever. And I did the Nin-Nin impression, and it probably doesn't come across, again, because of my crappy microphone and everything. It probably doesn't come across very well. In person, though, my Nin-Nin's a pretty good impression, right? And like nobody was expecting it. And so I don't know who was around, who I even said it to, but I said something like horribly dirty to one of my friends in the Nin-Nin voice, and like everybody was like laughing taco shell out their nose and choking on their Mountain Dew, and you know what I mean? It was a whole big thing, and people loved it. And so it became this running gag where all of the world's heroes are coming together in the mid 90s to get ready for this coming crisis of 1997, right? Because certain characters had been warned that it was coming. Powerhouse went 5 years into the future at one point, saw it. So he's been warning people and so on and so forth. And so at any rate, one of the characters that's in this massive army is Nin-Nin. It was an excuse for us to tell dirty jokes and stuff like that when we were playing. And he would hit on various girls. He really liked Psylocke from X-Men. He was hitting on Psylocke all the time. And I don't know. I guess you had to be there, but that was pretty funny. He was kind of a big part of the game. Um, and then we do a thing where Miko meets Dagda. And if you've been following my channel the whole time, you're familiar with the Dagda stuff we did way back when. For everybody else who's not familiar, one of the major quote unquote OCs of our game is Dagda from Celtic mythology, and he's known for a bunch of things. He's like the king of that pantheon. He's the quote unquote god of magic and stuff like that. But then on top of that, he was sort of like a male version of Aphrodite, where it's like his domains would be like love and fertility and physical romance and things like that, right? And so at any rate, at some point it just occurred to us, so we're like, well, here's all this just crazy stuff that Miko can do, right? Along those lines. Here's Dagda, and he does basically a bunch of different crazy stuff, but equally crazy. And we're like, man, kind of to quote Ghostbusters, like we've got to introduce these two. Um, so we did. And um we played it for laughs. We just sort of said like afterwards they had to buy all new furniture for her apartment, things like that. I thought it was funny. I don't know. It's probably it is admittedly crass. I apologize if I'm offending people with it, but um so we did that. She was around. And then when I would sometimes I'd run her as an NPC in an adventure and we would just do stuff like I'd pick a theme and we might just have a thing where it's like a bunch of ninjas, kind of like I mentioned Psylocke earlier, and maybe they have to go, maybe it is like, you know, Michelangelo and Mikamito and like Psylocke and whoever, and they have to go fight whatever, Shredder and Storm Shadow and we would run games like that. And then in those games, she wasn't really doing anything dirty. She was just swinging a sword, you know. And I was doing it as one of those ways to kind of just hit home the idea that the game world was about pop culture, right? That we thought of it as the crossover earth where just all pop culture um coexists. We actually did a story at one point that I don't know if I was going to get to it on the channel or not, but in 2012 we did a story where the idea was there had kind of been a multiverse before this one, and at one point it collapsed to form our game world, and that's why all these things that usually have nothing to do with each other, it was basically a big accident at CERN that created our world. But yeah, we got a lot of stuff running around. Trying to think if there's anything else from La Blue Girl I should say. I guess I'll just say this. It wasn't the only hentai that we included. We started throwing, I can't even remember the names of them. I remember there was one I liked where it was twin sisters they were like demon fighters or something, or they dealt with the supernatural, and again they were ninjas. There was a lot of that. Um we did that. I did not do the Overfiend stuff. The Overfiend series is very strange. It's like a lot of anime stuff. It's just bizarre. But like I think at the end of the Overfiend stuff, it's like the world ends and they're back to the first episode again for some reason. Like it's on a loop or whatever. And I was just kind of like, yeah, I don't want my world to end. So let's just not. Um, I don't know. I can't think of anything else to say about it. I guess if I can think of anything worth mentioning, I'll throw it in the comments section. And as always, we would love it if you left a comment, hit like, make sure you're still subscribed, all that jazz. And from everybody here at the longest running superhero role playing game on earth, we hope you have a good one, and we'll see you in the next adventure. Bye.